Hello there, Windwalker monks, and aspiring Windwalkers as well. Let's talk about why you like and dislike Monk, which has to be because of the builds and playstyle. For the first time since Shadowlands, Windwalker Monk is not at the bottom of the barrel. If anything, in rating is still one of the best DPSers, although dethroned by a few since the nerfs. And in dungeons, well, here it may struggle a bit more, but it's way better than you think and what people believe. I have been playing Windwalker up until plus 13s and 14s at the moment, and not only do I crank hard because that's how daddy does it, but I can also play multiple builds to suit my playstyle in the dungeons I do, and that's what I'm going to show you today. As many builds with different capstones so you can pick and choose what you like and not worry too much about an ability that needs a cast time. Let's first make a disclaimer that a lot of people will not like to hear, something I had to come to accept as well for myself. If you suck at your rotation, you can make any builds look terrible, regardless of which one is the best. Obviously, playing a build that's 10% better than a worse build will make you do more damage even if you suck. If that's the case, then sure, pick the best build you want, pick the meta class if you will, and it will help, but will not change the fact that you need to practice your class more. And that applies to every player in the game, by the way. The top players are gods at their spec since that's what they do all day. Play it, practice it, perfect it, own it. That normally should be obvious, and I wanted to make that point because too many people focus on external sources of player power. Yes, talents are one of those as well, instead of working on perfecting the internal ones, which are your understanding and execution of your rotation. There's not something we will discuss in this video, since this is not a guide for that, but rather a video to show you different builds you can play in case you are not a fan of the crackling Jade Lightning builds or slicing winds builds, or maybe the hero talents you need to play are not fun. You can play anything you want, and I will give you some of the best examples so far that worked well for me. To start it off, the best build right now is Conduit of the Celestials as your hero talent and Slicing Winds as a playstyle. This can be your primary build you play in keys, since that will be the focus here. Windwalkers, plenty strong in raids where you'll be fine by default. The reason you want this build is because Slicing Winds does a lot of damage on both packs but bosses as well, despite it being soft capped. Actually, the 5 target soft caps will make it difficult for you to compete with elemental shamans and holy DKs, fire mages, balanced druids, destro warlocks, and so on. But until you get to that point, you'll have all your dungeon portals and 12s done in time for those resilient keys. The way you play this build is fairly simple, and this will apply to all future builds with taking out the eventual abilities that you will not be talenting into. Assuming you have a basic understanding of Windwalker, to add Slicing Winds into your kit, you just need to understand that you cast this on cooldown no matter what. Wasting casts of this might just as well have you pick something else. On top of casting it on cooldown, you want Strike of the Windlord as close to on cooldown as possible, and you only delay it to make sure that you cast Fists of Fury right after it. With Conduit of the Celestials, you get Heart of the Jade Serpent that has a lot of benefits, but most importantly, it buffs up your Fists of Fury. In your cooldown windows, ideally you want to cast all of these 3 abilities with their associated combos, aka Rising Sun Kick and Whirling Dragon Punch and consuming the second stack of Dance of Chi-Ji, before you start casting your Conduit of the Celestial, since at the end of that cast, you get another Heart of the Jade Serpent, letting you cast another beefy Fist of Fury, granted a global or 2 after you finish the channel. Side note, channel spells are bugged, and this is extra bugged. You want to manually recast it just before it ends so you guarantee your Heart of the Jade Serpent. Otherwise, it can bug out and not give it to you. These abilities, cooldowns, and mini cooldowns will never perfectly align, and being able to align them just right will be part of your skill as a Windwalker. I'm still working on this for myself. Now that we got the basics out of the way, you can make this way more interesting by adding the crackling Jade Lightning to actually play Windwalker on steroids, or the actual Super Saiyan Monk that so thematically goes with the current tier set. You sacrifice these 2 talents that give you some decent single target boss damage to get the lightning ones, but you get still some single target back from Emperor's Capacitor and an additional 5 targets burst damage. Lightning builds are good when you need more small AoE burst, whether it is because your tank or the dungeon you are in has small pulls in general, or add spawns that you want to smack. Cinderbrew is a good example for this, where if you time it right or even hold your 20 stacks of Jade Lightning, you can use them on the blob ads of the blob boss. If you play with fire mages and unholy, you know these bad boys this season will suck ass at killing these ads when this is your speciality. And this is a good opportunity to mention that this alone makes Windwalker an amazing addition to your meta classes, since you cover a lot of their weaknesses, one of which is Giga Boss damage. Now, if you just don't like either of these capstones, there are builds you can play. Although Slicing Winds is slightly better, you can choose which of these two capstones you want to play by moving the Slicing Winds talent into Transfer of Power, or by moving the Jade Lightning talent into the Transfer of Power and Fury of Zuen. But if you dislike both of these, you can take a 3% overall DPS loss and not play with either of them, with this being the best build. Since I use dual wield, the dual threat talent seems to be the best choice for me at the moment, but you can swap this out for Drinking Horn cover if you have a two-hander, although the differences are so small it really doesn't matter that much. You will do slightly less damage, but if you are bad at casting these capstone abilities or simply dislike them that much, playing an OG Windwalker is going to be so close behind, you won't even notice the difference unless you are a machine. Note that all of these recommendations are based on my personal sims and research. They can differ for you, but likely by very little. The only thing that will remain true is that Slicing Winds Conduit will still be the best choice for everyone, even if it is by 0.2%. Moving to Shado-Pan, note that everything Shado-Pan does in Mythic Plus is about 7% behind Conduit in terms of overall performance, which means that in certain packs you will see a larger difference than that. Shado-Pan is just overall higher consistent damage, but close to no burst. Luckily, if you are a Slicing Winds hater, this is going to be good for you, since Jade Lightning seems the best for Shado-Pan at the moment. You can rotate Drinking Horn cover with Spiritual Focus depending on what you like, longer Storm Earths and Fire or more of them, and to treat it similarly to Conduit, you can opt for no Jade Lightning capstone, and currently this build seems to sim the best. Keep in mind that now we are talking about a 10% loss in overall performance. Now we are getting into the everyone will notice territory. However, I did play the Shado-Pan no-capstone build just to kind of prove a point in this particular dungeon, and you will see that this monk also is playing, I don't know if you can tell, but he is playing the Conduit of the Celestial Slicing Winds best build, and overall in terms of performance I was slightly ahead of him, even if our gear is almost identical. So it matters more on your execution of the class, spec, and knowledge of the dungeon, so you don't get yourself killed or misuse your cooldowns, rather than your talent build as well, further proving the point that I was trying to make at the beginning of the video, not for the purpose of beating my own chest by the way, but to showcase that playing right, even a suboptimal build will perform decently, and I believe this was a 12. You can see it on the screen if it not anyway. Anything higher and you are essentially either pushing performance or trying to prove a point, in which case you do you. But I will be fair and do one more thing before we wrap this up, and actually give you some pros and cons to the hero talents and then to these capstone focused playstyles. Firstly, for the hero talents, Shado-Pan is easier to play with less room for error, but does less damage than Conduit, by a little bit, noticeable in big packs where burst is a thing. Enough where if you play perfectly you will notice, but not enough where people will question you if you changed your talents. Conduit has higher burst and overall DPS, but is required to be used properly and in synergy with Slicing Winds ideally. The biggest downside is the cancelling bug, where you can lose windows of Heart of the Jade Serpent as well as raw DPS from the Conduit ability itself if you don't manually recast it. And even with that, the bug can still happen after the first tick of damage, long before you even end up cancelling it anyway. It sucks and needs to be fixed, but doesn't happen often. It's also harder to play since your opener has about 2 to 3 extra cooldowns to use in a very specific order. As for the capstones themselves, both Slicing Winds and Jade Lightning give you awesome burst damage, are fun to use, and give the spec a lot more depth and variety. However, misuse them, forget them, pop them at the wrong time, and you will lose a lot of damage. The biggest downside is their cast time. Slicing Winds can be channeled while moving very slowly, but Jade Lightning is static. Doing this on bosses like Floodgate's last boss will be tricky and will require trial and failure. The no-capstones are just the generic Windwalker gameplay. It's solid, loses a bit of overall DPS and a bit more burst damage on dangerous packs. It is more reliable to play for new players that are getting into Windwalker though. Both the no-capstone builds and Shado-Pan builds in general will start to lose out more and more in the higher keys that you do, however, so keep that in mind if you do decide to play them. Once again, all of these are based on my research and are variants of Windwalker playstyles for people who don't play at a high enough level where optimal talents are required, since there is actually more than only one way to play, and sometimes people make it seem like there's only one correct build and everything else is trolling. Just have fun at your own pace and hopefully you understand what you are trading away to play something that's not meta. And before you go, for more Windwalker content, we have videos like this one that goes into what you can do in keys that seem doomed, especially as a Windwalker, to time it and get to that score and loot.